So the topic of my talk will be about modeling uncertainty, and in particular I will talk about extreme levels of uncertainty that some people call ambiguity, where it is not possible often to place a probability value, a probability estimate on a certain outcome appearing, because it is so uncertain that we do not have this tool available. So what do we do in this kind of situation? Now, for businesses, this may arise in strategic investment decisions that often take a very long-term planning horizon, and of course these are relevant to most industries. Often there are many, the reason why this is difficult is that there are often many factors which affect future outcomes, and we will not know how these factors will develop in future. So we will need to make some estimate about that. The example is, for example, a telecommunications company that needs to decide where and how to compete in an emerging consumer multimedia market. For example, how to react to the threat of new entrants, such as Google's Chromecast, which is cannibalizing the traditional TV or cable TV channels, or decisions that a mining company has to do in what country or in which mine to invest. So these are all very long-term, highly uncertain decisions. Now, what kind of factors do we think could affect future profitability due to these investment decisions, these alternative investment decisions that companies have to deliver? Now, first, of course, there are the actual decisions that the company makes, and these will be within the control of the decision maker. But then there are many external factors outside of the control of the company. And coming back to my example of telecommunication, it will be how will the technology develop in future years, what's the regulatory environment, what will be the demand for certain products from the consumer, what will be the relation between hardware and content providers, and then also if companies operate in global markets, the impact of currency fluctuations and things like this. So uncertainties related to the alternative investment decisions that a company has control over and the external factors that they do not have control over interact in a sufficiently unpredictable way that it is not possible to identify a range of plausible outcome for these alternative decisions. So what can we do in this kind of situation? Now, first, of course, the answer of any empirical or quantitative person such as me is to build a model. A model will help to, what do we mean with a model? A model can be anything from what you type into an Excel forecast sheet to a data cube to a regression analysis. A model will tell us how certain factors relate to an outcome of interest. So how various factors or predictors relate, for example, to future profitability. It tells us, it will estimate the magnitude of impact on the outcome when one of these predictors or decisions changes while we hold all others constant. So it's in a way of taking account of the marginal impact of each one of these factors that are important when making decisions. Now, when we build a model, we have to first define a subset of external factors that we think are the best predictors of how the market, for example, will evolve over time. We will base this on what happened in the past, usually if we use evidence-based decision making. And then we will estimate how plausible variation in these factors will affect the future profitability of alternative investment decisions. Now, this will allow us to choose the investments that perform best under plausible variations of these external factors. Now, how do we go about to define these best predictors, and how do we go about of choosing the best investments when there are so many to choose from, often in a world where we are awash with data? Because in a typical model, we need to simplify. It is just not possible, often, to consider all the possible factors that may impact on the outcome of interest. So what the data analyst then has to do, they need to select a subset of factors or predictors, also a subset of the decisions that you could make in your company. And this subset is often based on quite vague criteria, what kind of predictors we take in these models. The model then allows us to test the joint impact of those on outcomes. And it allows us to model the impact of these alternative investments, considering the external factors and predictors, but only the ones that we could include in the model. Now, other factors may be important as well, but we cannot test for their importance on the final outcome because we cannot include all of them in the model. Also, some predictors that are left out of the model that we could not include, they may have altered the combined impact of the magnitude of that we estimated for the predictors that we included in the model. We cannot know this. So a random approach, a more or less random approach to model selection, and with this I mean what kind of indicators to include in the models and what not, ignores in a way the uncertainty that is inherent in this process, and it may lead to overconfidence inference or to decisions that are just more risky than we think they are. Also, if we choose only a subset of predictors, then we throw away available data, and all available data is highly valuable in order to make decisions. We do not want to throw away this information. So analysts call this a problem of modeling uncertainty, and there are several ways in the past years really have been developed to deal with these highly uncertain situation. Now, the basic idea that I will try to convey now here in my presentation is that we will not rely on one single model, where only a subset of predictors is chosen. We will estimate with these modeling approaches all models that can be estimated with the available data. And we can also use all possible different combinations of investment strategies and different predictors that may be out there that will help us to predict the future and also the future outcomes of these alternative investment decisions. Now, across all these models that we estimate with different types of predictors in them, we can compare how different the estimates are of the impact of the investments and the predictors, and we can find out how sensitive is our chosen investment strategy to the inclusion of different types of predictors. Now, if the outcomes of the strategies or the predictors vary a lot across models, then we will not consider this strategy further because it is too uncertain, it is not robust. And also, if a predictor, one of the external factors that we have, if this is too uncertain, we will not include it in our final model. And then the strategy is considered not robust and too unreliable to rely upon. Now, for the strategies that do not vary much across models or the alternative decisions, we generate pooled or average estimates across all the models in order to generate an estimate of the magnitude of impact on the future decisions. So this is a process called model averaging or extreme bound analysis. I will now give you an example from my work where we used this modeling approach for a specific problem that was posed to us, which was the question by WHO: what are the best investments that we can do in poor countries in order to improve life expectancy? The WHO Commission, they set up a commission on the social determinants of health. Now, this commission was set up to collate evidence on the causes of ill health or the causes of duration of life that lay outside of the health sector. And the commission, they did a very good job. The commission reviewed all available research evidence, or nearly all available research evidence, and different teams were responsible for different areas of public life, and they came up with a multitude of determinants of health of predictors of health or of best investment strategies. So I use these terms interchangeably. So they found, for example, that immunization, sanitation, access to healthcare, air quality, food security are all important predictors of life expectancy, and there was evidence of single studies that focused on these single determinants that they were important predictors. Now they also went more widely. They found that also things like education, fair employment, terms of trade, infrastructure, housing, and many more indicators were important. So in the end, what did the Commission conclude? They concluded everything is important. Now then WHO, of course, said, well, but what is most important? Where shall we, our scarce resources, where shall we invest them first, if you so want, in order to get the biggest impact? Now, of course, this question is very similar to a question that a company has, that also has you have also many different choices where to invest, but you want to know which one is the most robust and which one is the best investment decision. So what do we need in order to address this problem that we are facing here? Now, first, we need a lot of data on a similar problem in the past, historical data. Then we need serious computing power. So I show you here a supercomputer. This is now the biggest one at the moment in China, but at Imperial we also have a supercomputer that we used for this work. And then we need an analytical method and a clever analyst to apply it. Now, this is here what a model of life expectancy could look like. So on the left-hand side, you have life expectancy by country, and by country is now represented by the little I. And this is dependent on many, many different factors. In this example, I said life expectancy is dependent on 209 determinants. Yeah? And each beta value that you see here will estimate the magnitude of impact of this determinant on life expectancy. Now, I say will estimate. This is not possible, of course, to estimate this model because there are just too many regressors in this model, just too many predictors or determinants of life expectancy. We cannot estimate this model. Now we need to find out a way of how to condense this problem down. And this is what model averaging or extreme bound analysis does. With extreme bound analysis, it is possible to reduce all these different determinants that we have to, say, 20 regressors. And these would be our best investments in population health, considering the other investments that we can do. So if we have 20, we can take account of those, but also of the 209 others, and I will show you how this can be done. So how do we choose these 20 best regressors, these 20 best determinants, or in your example, the 20 best investment strategies? Now what we do is we basically specify a model with only 4 determinants or regressors at one point in time. But we estimate through all the 200, and we go through all 209 permutations that are possible by including always only 4. So you can see that with the little colored bars, this represents the different types of determinants that we include in this model. Now you can imagine that if we estimate all possible combinations of determinants, that the number of models that we need to estimate explodes exponentially, and we need to estimate millions of models. Now, if we, for our work that we did for WHO, if we would have estimated all the models on a normal desktop computer, it would have taken us 9 months, as long as a pregnancy. So what we did is we programmed this to run in parallel on Imperial's supercomputer. So then we obtain thousands of coefficient estimates for each determinant, because determinants will enter a model repeatedly with different combinations of other determinants. And then we will assess how frequently the coefficient estimate will switch signs across models, or how often they are 0. And if they switch very little, then we say we have a robust determinant of health or a robust investment in health. Now here are 3 examples. So for example, we found that, so you can see here lined up are essentially the different coefficient estimates from the left of the graph to the right of the graph that we get from the different models. So these are essentially the estimates of the magnitude of impact of crop production on life expectancy, considering all the other determinants that will also have an impact in the model. And you can see that the coefficient estimates, that they vary across models, because otherwise we wouldn't have a distribution. They would be all at one point on that horizontal yellow line, but they are not, so they vary. However, for crop production, the coefficient estimates, most of them are positive across all these different models. So we say we can be pretty confident if you invest in a better or more efficient crop production, that based on the past evidence, we can say that this is very likely to have a positive impact on life expectancy in countries. Now, for the determinant children out of school, that was another determinant for which we also got these thousands and thousands of coefficient estimates. Most of them were negative. So we said we can tell the government, we can say, improve schooling and try to allow children to go to school will have a positive impact on life expectancy. So getting children back into school. Now, the WHO Commission also said there's evidence that PM10 emissions, which are small particle emissions, will have a negative impact on life expectancy because of the pollution damaging health of individuals. Now, in our models, we could see that sometimes the impact was positive and sometimes the impact was negative. So we had to conclude that PM10 emissions is not a robust predictor of life expectancy, and we would have to recommend to the government that possibly other investments are more worthwhile to do first before we focus on this on air quality, at least in these poor countries. So this is basically the outcome that we get from these models. And once we get the different coefficient estimates, we can say what is the average across all the different estimated coefficients, and this is then the average magnitude of impact. In this model, we have found 20 robust determinants from the nearly 200 that we had. And for example, we found that prevalence of children living with HIV was one of the most robust predictors of life expectancy, obviously a negative predictor. And our recommendation was therefore to invest in prevention of mother-to-child transmission in the poorest countries. We also found that political stability and absence of violence and terrorism was an important predictor of life expectancy. The regulatory quality in a country, arable land, private health expenditures, as I said, the crop production index, and the result I particularly liked, which was the proportion of seats held by women in national government, which obviously is a kind of proxy for the value that the society places on gender equality. And you can read up this paper by following this link. And there are also more links that explains the data in more detail. Importantly, what we found many determinants that we found to have not a robust impact on life expectancy. This was surprisingly public spending on healthcare and education, but you have to remember these are the very poorest country. Debt service and debt release, foreign investment, urbanization and environmental degradation, just to name a few of those. Okay, just to conclude my presentation, I talked about that the outcomes of strategic decisions are often affected by many different factors. Now, extreme bound analysis, which is one form of model averaging, helps us identify the factors that show the most robust association with the outcome of interest if we test it across a wide range of future possible scenarios of how the future world could look like. It will also, and that is very helpful information for decision makers, it will also tell you in which investments not to put your money. At least not at the moment, based on the data we have and on the available evidence. This is what any data analyst will always say at the end of a presentation. Now, so the extreme bound analysis is a systematic approach to model specification search in a way. But of course, it does not replace a theory. There may be a theory, an underlying economic theory, that will plausibly explain causal effects, and that you may want to rely upon as well when you make decisions. Of course, the results apply to historical data, to the past. The future may look very different. Some factors may act as proxies for others, more underlying things, and you need to see beyond the model in order to understand this. And the results, of course, are dependent on